I'm John Miglosh for the Wisconsin DMA and the International Society for Strategic Marketing. Okay, and I have to keep an eye on what I'm covering today because it's going to be a mess, I think. First thing I wanted to talk about was Ford. Interestingly, I thought Ford. It's not a really long article, but they said that launching self-driving vehicles is the hardest thing the auto industry has faced. And the funny thing is, before I read that sentence, they were talking about the move toward deploying self-driving vehicles, and I'm thinking to myself, I'm not getting in one of those. And then I thought about how my grandfather might have thought. He was born in about 1880, 1890, I guess. And so my dad said that my uncle drove to town in their Ford Model T when he was 8 years old. He could drive the car, and it didn't go very fast. And so my grandfather probably lived in a world where there weren't cars to speak of. And imagine, the first couple times you got in one and roaring along and being in a different kind of control. But the interesting thing is the move from horse to car would have been greater control, I think, because horses are somewhat unpredictable. The first thing I learned in my riding lessons was you're putting a prey animal on top of a predator animal on top of a prey animal, and you can never quite know what's going to happen next. Whereas the car, it might break down. The brakes could fail, I suppose. Tire could blow and pull you off the road. But if you didn't go too much faster than a horse, I think you'd have a feeling of greater control where it actually responds. Now we're being asked to let go of that control, and I think that to me is far more intimidating. Though I think I read a cross-country account of a Tesla ride, and the author said, it was totally fine letting go of the wheel out in the country on the freeway. What's interesting to me is that they're really pushing it in the cities, which seems nuts. And on the cross country tour, they didn't let go of it in the cities. Just like cruise control. I mean, I use cruise control almost 100% of the time out on the highway, but not much in heavy traffic. And I think that's probably where it's going to settle, kind of like cruise control, where you have it. But anyway, what Ford is doing is they're saying, let's trust us enough to take a ride and keep coming back. Let's let the customer, rather than over promote it, let's let the customers be our advocates. Let's let people try it. And I think I may do that. It's supposed to come out in 2021. Be interesting. Okay, here was an interesting article about shopping habits in Asia and the Pacific. And it said that holiday shopping varies dramatically between different markets in the Asian Pacific. We're already getting our time to stop. We've only gone 5 minutes. The research revealed that Australians and South Koreans consider themselves to be holiday shoppers, although they're very, very different. Chinese consider themselves to be sporadic shoppers, and Singaporeans love bargains and deals. Now, the takeaway from this, and then there's all kinds of stuff, but the takeaway from this really is that you need to think about your customers. You need to think about, remember that the shopper profile changes, that because people are buying instead of buying for themselves, they're buying for others. It's a very different profile, and that's why it's funny to see in modeling, even in business to business, we see a change in seasonality through the holidays. And when we were first doing modeling, we were advocating modeling about monthly, and all the other modeling companies, all the big data companies were saying, and of course this was 25 years ago, but they were saying you just need one customer model. You need one model to rank your customers from good to bad, and that'll do you. And it isn't true at all. It's completely false. And we watch the models change in pre-holiday, in holiday, and in post-holiday dramatically, and in off-season dramatically. And probably the customers acquired in off-season are your most loyal if you're in a consumer holiday environment. Anyway, just thought I'd throw that in for you. Now, and this one, now why is this one? I don't know. This one seems to be too big. We'll make it smaller. I thought this was going to be about the nature of your customer profile, but instead it was about fraud. And it was about account takeover fraud, which is, I'm a customer and my account gets taken over by thieves. But here's really interesting point for merchants. Okay, while account takeover has increased 200% year over year for 4 years in a row, and people who think fraud is going down, the Juniper study is very clear that it's going up like crazy. I was really suspicious of the ANA who focused on a narrow range of fraud and said that that fraud was going down in the last 2 or 3 years, and it is not the case at all. So the Javelin study, and the Juniper study also said that the fraud was going up, and it's continuing to go up, and should be about $100 billion by 2023. But here's the important point. Tightening fraud screening parameters won't help merchants, and it can create even bigger problems. False declines. This is a much bigger problem. Merchants lost $331 billion to false declines. And, I have a funny consumer, my home address is a funny address, and so I'm used to getting declined. It's just something that comes with the territory, N57W blah 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 blah, and it's this long, and there's no street, and I went to the U.S. Post Office and Postal Service, and I said, could you change these? They said, we hate them, we really hate them. And I went to the Waukesha County executive, and he said, yeah, but we'd have to change our stationery. And then they put up signs everywhere, which doesn't help online at all. I mean, they put a sign on my town, put a sign at every address so that people could find the houses because it's such a mess. And they said, how will we find the fires? And I said, how does the rest of the world find the fires? No GPS will find my house. It's really a joke. But anyway, the important point is that the false decline problem is 75 times more than the 4.4 billion lost to CNP fraud. I worked in business to business, and we used, in those days, in the 80s, we had open account. And my boss would say that unless a company passed our credit checking, it wasn't a real order. And I explained to him that, if you eased up your credit and you had, because the owner was bragging that he had like a 0.5% bad debt problem, fraud problem, and people not paying. And I said, maybe if it was 1 or 2%, you might up your sales 10%. Would that make sense? He admitted it was. It's all about a risk and benefit. And so you have to be very careful tightening up too much and overshooting the mark. Okay? So this article is excellent, and I encourage you to find it. Let's see who's Raphael Lorenko, Executive Vice President at Clear Sale. He's got lots of nice tips for merchants, but a lot of them make a lot of sense. Watch out for people whose addresses have recently changed. Watch out for people who are suddenly buying way more product. What we typically see is we see an initial purchase or two, and then we see maybe more purchases, and then it sort of tapers off. So if they're older than a few years, it's very unlikely they're gonna buy a lot of stuff. So there's lots of tips down here in how to protect yourself. I highly encourage all merchants to read that. It's not as simple as just putting up a big paywall and making sure everybody passes it, because that is actually a very, very bad strategy. Well, I have some more articles here that I can't get to. Oh, here was one. Creating multi-sensory environments in e-commerce. Here's a tip. Mail something. Oh, and it's all about, about how the in-person shopping is dead. You know what? In the United States, 90% of purchases are made in store, only about 10%. Maybe it's up to 15, but it's minuscule in comparison to the retail purchases. Hate to tell you that. I don't want to burst anybody's bubble, but look at the real numbers. And they're always talking about how e-commerce has doubled or e-commerce has tripled or whatever it is. Yeah, that's great. But people like to buy in stores. And if you're not, the next step after that, mail something. People like to touch. They want to touch. Here we go. They want to touch something. Okay? And one of the greatest barriers to entry is touch. Okay? You can fake a website. You can have a phishing site. You can do all kinds of things online. But mail, you pretty much have to be legit, because interstate commerce laws can get you. Cross-state fraud through the mail, serious penalties. So mail gives a credibility that e-commerce doesn't. Just saying. Have a Merry Christmas. I'm John Miglosh. Like and share. Your friends will think you're smart. Have a great day. Bye-bye.